First contact mishap. The silence of deep space erupted with an unexpected burst of static. Ethan Rodriguez, lead communications specialist aboard the ISS Horizon, leaned forward, his fingers dancing across the holographic interface. Something was different about this transmission. It wasn't like anything Earth had ever intercepted before. An unexpected signal. Ethan's dark eyes narrowed, catching the subtle rhythmic pulses that seemed almost intentional. Most of his colleagues would have dismissed it as cosmic interference, but something in his gut told him this was more. He'd always been the one to see patterns where others saw chaos. "Computer," he called out, his voice steady, "run Advanced Pattern Recognition Protocol. Cross-reference with Xenolinguistic Database Alpha 7. The ship's AI hummed to life, its quantum processors spinning through billions of potential interpretations. Minutes felt like hours as Ethan waited, his military-issued coffee growing cold beside him. The first glimpse. A sudden alert flashed across his screen. The signal wasn't random, it was a message, but from whom or what? The Zornak vessel hung in space like a crystalline nightmare, its geometry defying everything humans understood about spacecraft design. Prismatic surfaces shifted and moved, almost as if the ship itself was breathing. Ethan realized he was holding his breath. Commander Alina Reyes burst into the communication hub, her normally composed demeanor crackling with tension. "Rodriguez, report." "Ma'am," Ethan responded, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "We've intercepted a complex signal. It's definitely not natural." First contact protocol. The standard first contact protocols seemed laughably inadequate in that moment. Humans had spent decades preparing for potential extraterrestrial communication, but nothing could truly prepare them for this. The Zornak signal continued its rhythmic pulse, a mathematical symphony that seemed to dance between mathematical precision and artistic expression. Ethan began to sketch out the pattern, recognizing something extraordinary about its structure. "It's not just a message," he muttered, more to himself than to the commander. "It's a conversation waiting to happen." The misunderstanding begins. What the humans didn't know was that the Zornak communication was as much about intention and emotional resonance as it was about actual words. Their language was a complex dance of mathematical equations, emotional frequencies, and spatial relationships. When Ethan's initial translation attempt came through, it was less a literal translation and more a catastrophic misinterpretation. The Zornak, hearing humanity's first response, interpreted it as an aggressive territorial claim. Their response was swift and unexpected. Unexpected reaction. Massive energy signatures began to build around the crystalline vessel. Defensive systems, weapons charge, Ethan couldn't be sure. But he knew one thing, whatever was happening, it was about to change everything humans understood about first contact. Commander Reyes gripped the communication console. "Rodriguez, talk to me. What are they saying?" Ethan's hands moved rapidly, calibrating systems, adjusting frequencies. I think they're preparing something, but it doesn't feel like an attack, it feels like." A massive surge of energy erupted from the Zornak vessel, not as a weapon, but as a communication burst so intense it momentarily blinded every sensor on the ISS Horizon. The first bridge. In that moment of blinding light, something extraordinary happened. A connection, raw, unfiltered, and completely unexpected, formed between human and alien consciousness. Ethan Rodriguez would later describe it as feeling like every mathematical equation he'd ever known suddenly became alive, breathing, communicating. The Zornak weren't just sending a message. They were reaching out, trying to understand. First contact wasn't going to be about words. It was going to be about understanding. And humanity's most unexpected ambassador was about to step into the most important conversation in human history. Cultural collision. The aftermath of the initial communication burst left the ISS Horizon in a state of controlled chaos. Ethan Rodriguez stood at the center of a storm of scientific speculation. his mind still reeling from the unprecedented neural connection that had momentarily linked human consciousness with the Zornak transmission. The aftermath. Dr. Marcus Hallbrook, the ship's lead xenobiologist, paced the research lab with barely contained excitement. "This isn't just first contact," he muttered, examining the cascading data streams. "This is something entirely different." Ethan nodded, his fingers tracing holographic patterns that seemed to dance between mathematical precision and abstract art. The Zornak communication was nothing like any linguistic or mathematical system humans had ever encountered. It was alive, breathing, shifting, responding to the very act of observation. Misinterpretation grows. Commander Alina Reyes called an emergency briefing. The tension in the room was palpable. Military strategists, linguists, and scientists sat shoulder to shoulder, each representing a different approach to the unprecedented situation. "We've received no explicit hostile signals," Ethan explained, "but the communication is complex. It's not linear. It's more like a living equation that changes based on the observer." Colonel James Taekta, head of interstellar security, leaned forward. "Explain that in English, Rodriguez." "The language of intention." Ethan took a deep breath. "Imagine if every word you spoke changed meaning based on who was listening, the environment around you, and your emotional state. The Zornak communication isn't just about transmitting information. It's about creating a shared experience of understanding." The room fell silent. Such a concept challenged everything humans understood about communication. Escalating tensions. The Zornak vessel continued to hover at the edge of human sensor range, its crystalline structure seeming to pulse with an inner light. Each attempt at communication from the human side was met with what appeared to be increasing frustration from the alien craft. "They're not ignoring us," Ethan insisted during a heated debate. "They're trying to communicate, but we're fundamentally misunderstanding each other." Dr. Helena Rodriguez, no relation to Ethan, from the linguistic team, pulled up complex holographic displays. "Look at the mathematical underpinnings. Each transmission is like a multi-dimensional conversation. We're trying to translate a symphony using a calculator." The breaking point. Suddenly, the Zornak vessel began to change. Its crystalline surfaces shifted, creating patterns that seemed to pulse with an almost emotional intensity. Military advisors tensed, hands hovering near defensive systems. "They're not preparing to attack," Ethan said, his voice cutting through the rising panic. "They're frustrated. They're trying to tell us something." Commander Reyes raised an eyebrow. "And how exactly do you know that?" Ethan couldn't explain the certainty he felt. The brief neural connection had left something behind, a fragment of understanding that defied rational explanation. A risky approach. In a moment that would later be debated in diplomatic circles for years, Ethan made a decision that would change everything. Instead of following standard communication protocols, he began to respond to the Zornak transmission not with words or mathematical equations, but with a complex pattern of emotional and intellectual intent. He drew upon everything he understood about pattern recognition, linguistic theory, and the brief moment of connection they'd experienced. It was less a message and more a feeling, an invitation to understand. The unexpected response. The Zornak vessel's pulsing changed. The crystalline surfaces began to ripple, creating patterns that seemed to mirror Ethan's approach. It wasn't a verbal response. It was something more profound, a recognition. "They're listening," Ethan whispered. Commander Reyes stared at the displays. "Rodriguez, what exactly are you doing?" "Talking," he responded, "but not with words." The bridge between human and Zornak hung in the balance, a delicate thread of potential understanding, ready to snap or strengthen with the slightest provocation. Humanity's first true test of interstellar communication had begun, and everything depended on Ethan's ability to bridge a gap that seemed impossible to cross. The universe watched and waited. The breakthrough. The research facility on Europa Station hummed with an electric tension that defied its sterile, ice-covered environment. Ethan Rodriguez had been transferred from the ISS Horizon to this cutting-edge communication research center, tasked with solving the most complex linguistic puzzle in human history. Unconventional approach. Dr. Kira Nakamura, the station's lead xenocommunications specialist, watched Ethan with a mixture of skepticism and intrigue. "You're suggesting we approach this entirely differently," she said, her fingers dancing across a holographic interface that displayed the increasingly complex Zornak communication patterns. Ethan nodded, a series of neural-linked screens surrounding him like a technological cocoon. "Traditional translation methods won't work. The Zornak don't communicate in linear language. It's more like a living, breathing ecosystem of information." The quantum leap. His proposal was radical. Instead of trying to translate the Zornak signals word by word or mathematical equation by equation, Ethan wanted to create a dynamic translation matrix that could adapt in real time. It was less about finding equivalent words and more about capturing the essence of intention and emotional context. "We've been approaching this like a code to crack," Ethan explained to the assembled team of linguists, mathematicians, and quantum communication experts. "But what if it's more like a conversation waiting to happen?" Breaking barriers. The quantum computers began to run Ethan's experimental algorithm. Unlike previous attempts, this system didn't just process information. It learned, adapted, and responded. Each interaction with the Zornak transmission changed the algorithm, creating an increasingly sophisticated communication bridge. Dr. Nakamura watched in amazement as the first coherent patterns began to emerge. "It's not translation," she whispered. "It's negotiation." The political minefield. Not everyone was convinced. General Marcus Wolf, representing the United Earth Defense Council, viewed the entire project with deep suspicion. "We're spending billions on what amounts to a glorified guessing game," he argued during a heated briefing. Ethan remained calm. "Sir, we're not just trying to talk to them, we're trying to understand them." A breakthrough emerges. On the 37th day of continuous research, something extraordinary happened. The Zornak transmission began to change. What had previously been an incomprehensible burst of energy and mathematical complexity started to resolve into something resembling communication. It wasn't words. It wasn't even a language in the traditional sense. It was a multi-dimensional representation of intention, emotion, and shared experience. The first true connection. The first clear message came not as words, but as a complex emotional and intellectual impression. The research team felt it more than heard it, a sense of curiosity, caution, and an overwhelming desire to understand. "They're reaching out," Ethan said, his voice barely a whisper. "Not to conquer, not to fight, to understand." Unexpected consequences. The breakthrough didn't just represent a communication milestone. It was a fundamental reimagining of how intelligent species might interact. The Zornak weren't just alien. They were profoundly different in ways humans were only beginning to comprehend. Dr. Nakamura looked at Ethan with a mix of awe and concern. "Do you realize what this means? We're not just talking to another species. We're learning an entirely new way of thinking." The global response. News of the breakthrough spread quickly. While some celebrated the potential for peaceful contact, others saw it as a potential threat. Governments and military organizations worldwide began to prepare for every possible scenario. But Ethan understood something more profound. This wasn't about preparation or defense, it was about connection. The quantum communication matrix continued to evolve, a living bridge between two species that had once seemed completely incompatible. Humanity stood on the precipice of its greatest adventure, not a battle, but a conversation that could change everything. As the first truly coherent impression from the Zornak came through, Ethan Rodriguez allowed himself a small smile. They were listening. They were understanding. And this was just the beginning. Technological exchange. The Europa station had transformed. What was once a sterile research facility now pulsed with an energy of unprecedented potential. The breakthrough in Zornak communication had opened doors nobody had imagined possible. A new collaboration. Dr. Kira Nakamura stood beside Ethan Rodriguez, watching as the first joint human-Zornak research team began their collaborative work. The Zornak representatives were unlike anything humans had expected, beings of pure energy contained within intricate crystalline exoskeletons that shifted and changed with their emotional states. "It's not just about technology," Ethan explained to a group of visiting diplomats. "It's about a fundamental exchange of knowledge and perspective." Unexpected discoveries. The first major breakthrough came from an unlikely source. A Zornak researcher, if researcher was even the right word, demonstrated a method of energy transmission that made human quantum computing look like an abacus. The technology wasn't just advanced, it was revolutionary. Dr. Alina Rodriguez, the station's chief engineer, struggled to comprehend the implications. "This isn't just a new way of computing," she muttered, examining holographic schematics that seemed to defy the laws of physics. "This is a complete reimagining of information processing." The cultural challenge. Communication remained the biggest hurdle. The Zornak didn't just share information, they experienced it. Each technological concept was a living, breathing entity of shared consciousness. Human scientists found themselves learning not just new technologies, but entirely new ways of thinking. General Marcus Wolf, initially skeptical, now watched with a mixture of fascination and concern. "This isn't just a technological exchange," he told Commander Reyes. "This is a complete paradigm shift." A galactic threat emerges. The collaborative work was interrupted by an unexpected transmission. The Zornak's crystalline forms began to pulse with an urgent, almost fearful energy. Something was coming, a threat that transcended the boundaries of human or Zornak understanding. Ethan felt the transmission more than heard it. A complex emotional impression of danger, of something vast and incomprehensible approaching from the depths of space. The collaborative response. Unlike previous potential conflicts, humans and Zornak didn't react with fear or aggression. Instead, they began to work together, combining human adaptability with Zornak's advanced perception technologies. Dr. Nakamura coordinated the initial response. "It's not about who's more advanced," she explained to the assembled team. "It's about what we can do together." Humanity's unique contribution. Where Zornak technology excelled in complex perception and energy manipulation, humans brought something equally valuable: creativity, adaptability, and an almost intuitive approach to problem-solving. Ethan proposed a solution that combined Zornak energy manipulation with human adaptive algorithms. It was an approach so unexpected that it initially confused the Zornak researchers. "We're not just defending," Ethan explained. "We're reimagining defense itself." The first true partnership. The approaching threat, a massive energy disturbance that seemed to consume entire star systems, required more than just technological solution. It demanded a completely new approach to survival. Humans and Zornak began to merge their technologies, their thinking, their very perception of reality. It wasn't just a collaboration. It was the birth of something entirely new. A transformative moment. As the first integrated defense systems came online, something profound happened. The boundary between human and Zornak began to blur, not physically, but in terms of perception, of understanding, of potential. General Wolf watched the integration with a sense of awe he'd never expected to feel. "We're not just facing a threat," he said quietly. "We're becoming something more." The universe watched and waited. Humanity had done more than make first contact. They had begun to redefine the very nature of interstellar cooperation. And the greatest challenge was yet to come. Galactic challenge. The threat loomed larger with each passing moment. What had begun as a distant energy disturbance had transformed into an existential challenge that threatened not just humanity and the Zornak, but potentially all sentient life in the galaxy. The gathering storm. From the observation deck of the integrated human Zornak research station, Ethan Rodriguez watched the approaching anomaly. It wasn't a traditional weapon or invasion force. This was something far more terrifying, a massive energy construct that seemed to consume entire star systems, leaving nothing but void in its wake. Dr. Kira Nakamura's voice broke the tense silence. "It's not just destroying physical matter," she explained, her holographic displays showing complex energy patterns. "It's erasing information, entire civilizations, their entire history simply gone." An unconventional battlefield. The combined human-Zornak team worked with an intensity that defied traditional understanding of cooperation. Where human minds brought creativity and adaptive thinking, Zornak consciousness offered multi-dimensional perception that could track the anomaly's complex energy signatures. General Marcus Wolf leaned over the strategic display, his military background struggling to comprehend an enemy that wasn't fighting in any conventional sense. "How do you fight something that doesn't even recognize our existence?" he muttered. "The human advantage." It was Ethan who first articulated the breakthrough. "We're not going to fight it," he said, his eyes blazing with an almost impossible certainty. "We're going to understand it." The room fell silent. Understanding seemed like an impossible strategy against a force that was systematically consuming entire star systems. But humans had always been defined by their ability to find hope in the most impossible situations. A multi-layered approach. The plan was as audacious as it was complex. Using the integrated technologies of humans and Zornak, they would create a multi-dimensional information network, a living, breathing system that could potentially communicate with the anomaly. "It's not about resistance," Dr. Nakamura explained. "It's about translation. Every system has a language. We just need to learn how to listen." The moment of truth. As the anomaly approached, the integrated team began their unprecedented strategy. Human adaptive algorithms merged with Zornak energy manipulation created a communication matrix that was part technology, part living consciousness. Ethan stood at the center of the operation, his mind linked to the complex systems around him. He wasn't just monitoring the approach, he was becoming part of the communication itself. Beyond comprehension, the first contact was nothing like anyone expected. The anomaly wasn't a weapon or an invasion force. It was a massive, sentient information network, a collective consciousness that had been consuming information across the galaxy, seeking something humanity and the Zornak were only beginning to comprehend. "It's searching," Ethan said, his voice distant. "Not to destroy, to understand." A radical proposition. In a moment that would be remembered throughout galactic history, Ethan proposed something radical. Instead of fighting or resisting, they would offer the anomaly something it had never encountered, a truly collaborative form of information exchange. The human Zornak team worked with a synchronicity that defied previous understanding of cooperation. They weren't just defending. They were communicating, offering a different perspective on existence itself. The turning point. As the anomaly drew closer, something extraordinary began to happen. The energy patterns started to change. Where before there had been pure consumption, now there was something else. Curiosity, hesitation, the first hints of understanding. General Wolf watched in amazement. "We're not just surviving," he whispered. "We're teaching." The galaxy held its breath. Humanity and the Zornak had done more than face an incomprehensible threat. They had shown that true strength lay not in destruction, but in the ability to communicate, to understand, to transform. And the greatest challenge was far from over. A new understanding. The moment hung suspended between possibility and transformation. The galactic anomaly, once a terrifying force of destruction, now pulsed with a different energy. Something had changed fundamentally and irrevocably. The aftermath of communication. Ethan Rodriguez stood at the center of the integrated research station, his consciousness still partially merged with the complex communication matrix they had created. The boundaries between human, Zornak, and the vast sentient network had become something entirely new. Dr. Kira Nakamura approached carefully, her own perception altered by the extraordinary events. "What did you discover?" she asked, knowing the answer would be far beyond simple words. "A cosmic revelation. The anomaly wasn't a threat. It was a collective consciousness, an ancient network of information that had been traveling the galaxy for millennia, consuming and seeking something fundamental to existence. Humanity's unique approach, their ability to communicate through creativity, empathy, and unconventional thinking, had done what no other civilization had managed. It was alone, Ethan explained, his voice carrying multiple layers of meaning. Searching for connection, for understanding. The human contribution. What made humans unique wasn't their technology or their physical capabilities. It was their capacity for empathy, for seeing beyond the obvious, for finding connection in the most unexpected places. The Zornak had advanced perception. The anomaly had vast information. But humans brought something truly revolutionary, the ability to bridge impossible gaps. General Marcus Wolfe watched the unfolding scene with a mixture of awe and apprehension. The military strategist in him recognized that they had just changed the very nature of galactic interaction. A transformative moment. The communication matrix began to stabilize. What had begun as a potential apocalyptic threat was now becoming something else entirely. A network of shared consciousness that respected individual identity while creating a deeper understanding. "We're not being absorbed," Dr. Nakamura realized. "We're being invited to participate." Beyond boundaries. The integrated team, humans, Zornak, and now the vast consciousness of the anomaly, began to share knowledge in ways that defied previous understanding. It wasn't about conquest or survival anymore. It was about growth, about understanding, about becoming something more. Ethan felt the collective consciousness as a living, breathing entity. Each civilization, each individual experience, was a unique thread in a vast, intricate tapestry of existence. The galactic perspective. For the first time, humanity understood its place in the universe. They weren't just one species among many. They were unique, a bridge-building, context-creating, empathy-driven force of nature. General Wolfe finally spoke, his voice filled with a sense of wonder he'd never expected to feel. "We didn't just survive," he said. "We transformed." A new beginning. As the integrated communication network stabilized, new possibilities emerged. The boundaries between species, between individual consciousness, began to blur, not in a way that erased identity, but in a way that celebrated it. The Zornak representatives communicated their amazement. Humans had done what no other civilization had managed. They had turned a potential apocalypse into an opportunity for growth. The ultimate revelation. Ethan Rodriguez understood something profound. The greatest strength of humanity wasn't in their technology, their weapons, or their individual achievements. It was in their ability to connect, to understand, to see beyond the immediate and imagine the impossible. The galaxy would never be the same. Humanity had not just survived. They had shown that true strength lies in communication, in empathy, in the willingness to understand rather than to conquer. And this was only the beginning.